I think I might die if I don't sleep tonight, guys. Just warning.
Oh, Tabs.
I might
it's
just
the
kill
worst.
over. I woke up this morning. I was like, there is no way I can make it
like-
through this day. How? It's 4 o'clock
Oh.
in the morning right now.
Oh no. Have you tried
No.
melatonin? I know, not funny.
Uh.
Not funny.
Does not
No.
work.
Should I have a cut you?
I've heard the
Yeah.
reviews. Amazon says does not recommend.
Does not.
They do go to sleep. They just don't stay asleep. And
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, no thanks.
Sometimes they don't even go to sleep. I read
That's the
about a kid
problem
like
I
that.
have.
I'm gonna get my
Either
head.
I know
not
that's
going
already
to
your
sleep.
problem.
Yeah,
The thing
or
is-
getting up 2 hours later.
Ugh.
You ready?
Yeah, let's do this.
Hello and welcome to Table for Five with no reservations. Take a seat at the table for a fresh, sweet, salty, tart, and pleasantly bitter conversation.
Thank you for taking a seat at the table. This is our sensory episode where we're going to be talking about how sensory affects autism. Seated at the table tonight is Jamie,
Hello.
Rachel,
Hey everybody.
Jen,
Hi everyone.
Tabitha,
Hello.
and I am Kim McIsaac. So I figured we would start with just a brief definition of what sensory processing is. Obviously, most people that have children on the spectrum have also children with sensory processing disorder. So sensory processing disorder is a condition which the brain has trouble receiving and responding to information that comes in through the senses, formerly referred as sensory integration dysfunction, which is what Alyssa originally, they didn't call it sensory processing when she was diagnosed with that. She was diagnosed with sensory integration. It is not currently recognized as a distinct medical diagnosis. Some people with sensory processing disorder are oversensitive to things in their environment. Common sounds may be painful or overwhelming. The light touch of a shirt may hurt the skin. That's just examples. Every definition basically is that. It's just very small, simple definition. 80% of children diagnosed with autism also have sensory processing disorder, which is a pretty large amount. You can have sensory processing disorder without autism. I think it's between 6 and 16% of the population have sensory processing just standing alone. So, which is a pretty small percentage. But I know when Alyssa was first referred to early intervention, they had taught me about the sensory integration, and it really explained a lot of her symptoms. So I was pretty convinced that that explained all of her behaviors and things that she had. And they were kind of like, yeah, like we don't see autism. She's social, she's affectionate, she's a girl, all these things kind of back then, especially weren't some of the things that she was doing weren't commonly associated with autism as they are now. So I was pretty like, yeah, like this, pretty much really explains it. It really can just be so different for each individual person. Like Alyssa's has really changed over the years. When she was younger, it was really, really, I mean, her sensory issues kind of even overtook the autism issues, to be honest. And we'll all give examples and stuff because all our kids are different ages and different places, different parts of the spectrum where it affects you differently. A lot of times you're either oversensitive or undersensitive. Alyssa happened to be both. Some kids are both, which makes it really hard giving them therapy because it's like the therapy that's for somebody seeking something and the therapy for someone that's avoiding something sometimes like kind of contradicts each other. So that definitely makes it difficult. I'll give an example of Alyssa had a really hard time. She didn't like clothes on when she was younger. And when I used to get her up in the morning to bring my son to preschool, she would get really upset, like when I was putting her sneakers on, her jacket on, and she would just have a temper tantrum, which, I wouldn't want someone dragging me out of bed, putting stuff on me. And that's just the way I always thought of it. Like, she's just tired. She doesn't want all this stuff on her. I mean, and then I'm throwing her in a car seat. Like, who could really blame her? But when we started working with an OT, they're like, no, that's like somebody taking you out of bed and putting you in a tub of ice cold water. That's what that feels like to her body. So as much as I wouldn't want someone coming in and, putting sneakers on, and a lot of kids don't like jackets on when they're 1 and 2 in those toddler ages, it's vastly different. That never left my brain. Like every time I would think about stuff, I would just think about that comparison. So basically it's like a shock to their body. Not everybody, obviously all kids process it differently, and some kids can have way more severe sensory issues than others. But there's so many things that are associated with sensory processing that, like, I never like realized, it's all the things, like it's the eating, it's the clothing, it's the jumping, the wandering around the house. Like there's so many things that like, even I think it was just a few years ago that I learned when they wander around the house aimlessly. I remember Alyssa did that all the time. She would just wander from room to room to room. And I never knew that was associated with sensory, because it's almost like they can't like police their body. It's like, it's just they have to like keep going. I mean, it's really, really interesting for those that, maybe don't have your children diagnosed yet, or maybe, are kind of on that borderline of thinking, should you get them evaluated. There are 8 different things for sensory processing, which is the 5 senses. So obviously that's touch, sight, sound, smell, taste. And then there's 3 other things, which are vestibular, which is basically that's your inner ear and brain movement. So that's if you're clumsy, you lose your balance a lot, stuff like that is vestibular. These would be people that like can't do rides, don't like swinging, get very, very dizzy, very sensitive. Proprioception, which is it's like your body's movement in position in relation to like other people. I mean, if you've ever heard the term bull in a china shop, I mean, they just go bang into things, just don't have that motor planning. So it's like when they're going up the stairs to a slide, or they're, getting in the sitting position, like things that like you might not really notice unless you're really looking for them. And then something that's a little newer is called, I might say it wrong, I believe it's interception. That is like you don't recognize when you're full, or you don't recognize when you're hungry. So in my house, one of my biggest pet peeves is when I ask somebody if, did somebody feed Alyssa? And they go, oh, she didn't come out. She'd come out if she was hungry. She won't. Her sense of hunger is not like our sense of hunger. She does not recognize that in the same way that we do. And the same thing for some people with getting full. I mean, I might have that. Just keep
Well, I'm
eating.
glad I know what the name is now for myself.
Yes.
Thank you, Kimmy.
Same thing to be able to like hot or cold, or if something's too hot or too cold, like these are the things that your brain doesn't recognize, or they recognize them slowly. All those things together make up sensory processing disorder. And obviously, like some people have certain parts of it and not other parts of it. To me, it's very, very interesting, and it's very confusing because it's like it does overlap with autism. So I think it's hard sometimes to discriminate what's sensory processing, what's autism. There's just a ton of overlap. It also doesn't help that it's not like a fixed medical term. It's not in the DSM-5. A lot of times it has to be diagnosed by an occupational therapist. So
like, lucky us, we have another spectrum to deal with.
I know. I think that's really tricky if you don't have the access to the right therapist and stuff like that. And obviously the most common therapy that you would do would be to go to an OT, and they would kind of like figure out like, is your child, are they hypersensitive? Are they seeker? Do they need, Alyssa always needed to bounce. I mean, you'd literally be a human trampoline. Like that was just what regulated her. And some kids run. I know I have a little boy, for instance, at the daycare who I'm very sure that he has autism. He definitely has sensory processing. And the kids aren't supposed to run. Obviously all the kids run, and we try to have, and it's different having 9 kids running in a room as opposed to 1. But this little boy needs to run. It's different, it's like he is just back and forth. It's not like purposeful, like the kids chase each other, you know what I mean? Or they run away from you.
Yeah.
Like, this little boy has to just go back and forth. And, it's different. The teachers obviously don't recognize that. Obviously because of Alyssa and all the people I know that have kids on the spectrum and stuff like that, I can kind of see it a little more. But I don't know if anybody wants to start and talking about like their experiences and their children's experiences with sensory.
I can start. So with my son, Jesse, he's now 8 years old, but he's a seeker and an avoider for sure. I think some of our first clues to autism were based a lot around sensory stuff. I mean, I didn't realize at first, but like one of the things he did when he was a baby, which some babies do, not always meaning autism, but he would rub his head on the ground as he crawled, and he like that. And from a very young age, he would go back and forth, whether that be crawling, and then as soon as he could walk back and forth. As soon as he could running back and forth. Literally just now, right before he went to bed, he was in my room running back and forth. When you're talking about the kid running, Kimmy, I was like, that's Jesse. Like that is his stem. That's what he does. It's comforting to him, but he just can't hold still. Like the few times you'll see him holding still is like if he's playing a video game, sometimes watching a show, but even then he's fidgeting with his mouth, with his fingers. He's makes the craziest like shapes and stuff with his fingers. He's always touching things. He doesn't do well with like fidgets and stuff. And I'm sure we'll talk about like taking some of the sensory needs and translating them to toys or other things, because some of these things come with either harming themselves or doing things that are dangerous. But he's never been good. Like we can give him a sensory toy and he might play it for a little bit, but we haven't found one that he's like attached to. He does a lot with his mouth. He puts a lot of things in his mouth. So we try Chewies a lot and stuff at school to try to like, he'll put phones in his mouth and computers and cords. Like, I know it sounds crazy to put a computer in your mouth, but he's put a laptop, like bitten down on a laptop before. So stuff like that, we have to be really careful around, but that's a lot of his seeking. He touches it. You go to the grocery store, he's touching everything. You walk through a parking lot, we're like, don't touch that person's car. You know, we're setting off car alarms. He cannot keep his hands to himself. He has to feel everything around him, and he loves textures and he loves feeling things. He also loves like his reflection and cute stuff like that.
They all do.
Yeah. And then as an avoider, he is very sensitive to sound. So we figured that out when he was really young. I think I've told this story before. We were at Disneyland and we went to, it was like, you know, at the end of the night, they do like a show. This was like they're at California Adventure, their like water show. And he was pretty little. I want to say he was like almost 2. I think it was October and his birthday is like very end of January. So, but that went out and we thought it might be loud for him. So we like covered his ears and stuff, but he also being tired from being at Disneyland, but his reaction was so big to that. I was like, oh my gosh. And he had big reactions before. And this was before we knew that it was autism or anything like that. But I just could not understand why. Like we got out of there so fast. It freaked me out, but things like that. And then like the first time we tried to take him to a movie, which we knew would be difficult with a toddler, no matter what. I think he was 3, 2.5 or so. He just could not stay in the room. And so that was when I was like, something's going on with his ears. And by that point, once we got closer to 3 and stuff, we started looking at autism. And so that's when we started like, okay, I think he's sensitive to sound, and then like bright lights and stuff that can, he's fascinated by that, but at the same time, it irks him somehow inside. So, and when that all relates to autism, it's like with the sound, like, I don't know if he's hearing things like incredibly loud because of his autism, or his reactions are so much bigger because of autism. So that mixes in too. And also with like this, the touching thing, the seeking thing, he doesn't have the social awareness to not do those things. So it's like, oh, if this feels good, or I want to do this, I'm just going to do it because it feels good to me. And trying to explain to someone who doesn't understand, like, well, that's not socially acceptable, or people aren't going to understand why you're doing that. That's where it gets like really hard as we're getting into like 8 years old, and especially like touching even ourselves, our body, or he'll like want to lift up his shirt and cover his face. And so that's kind of where we're at now. I know sensory is such a big part of our everyday life and everything we do. It's something I have to think about everywhere we're going, is what's it going to feel like? What's it going to feel like? What's it going to look like?
And it's like I said before, some kids are one or the other, and then other kids are both. So, you know, it is really difficult to navigate. And I feel like the more you learn about it, the more you're able to like understand this, the more you're able to help them through it, because it's hard when you don't understand. Like Alyssa used to, it would have to be metal. So she'd stick keys in her mouth. She'd put her mouth on a fence, like, which obviously you're at the playground and you don't want her mouth on the fence. It's disgusting. But it's like, she couldn't, like, it was like, she just couldn't help it. Like she just had the urge to do it. And it was like, and if like you took the keys away, she would lose it. Like it was just, but like, I don't think I really understood at the time that was like what was regulating her. Like I didn't understand that then. Like I knew she wanted to do it, but like I didn't understand that she needed to do it necessarily. But it would be hard because you'd be, say, at a party and she'd pick somebody else's keys and put them in her mouth, and somebody else, you know, they might not want their keys in her mouth. So it's, I think, you know, the more you understand about it, I feel like the more you can kind of help them get through it, because you just have like that more of an understanding. And it's like very complicated.
Well, and that's where it comes in, like, okay, if she likes to put metal in her mouth, what can we put in her mouth that's similar but safer, but still like getting her to understand she can't put anything. It's so complicated. And I will say with Jesse too, we are very fortunate. The clothes have never been a big deal. Like he would prefer like sweats to jeans and stuff like that. But I know for a lot of people, the clothes. And so kind of grateful that's not something I have to do. But I do really walk up and find my kid licking walls. So that all
Yeah.
Found-
I had just written down some examples for people that like don't necessarily know. So hypersensitive would be they're easily stimulated, they have a low tolerance for pain, sensitive to noise, a picky eater. So that's hypersensitive. And then the other end is they call it hyposensitivity, which is when they don't have enough stimulation. So this is when they're going to seek it. They have a high pain tolerance. They bump things, they mouth items. And then, like I said, then you have kids that cross, which I think many of our kids here seem to. Jesse obviously does. I know Sally does. Alyssa, I mean, I have to say though, like as hard as her like sensory issues were, and they were like extremely, extremely high, she has grown out of a lot of them. So they can definitely like their bodies can mature as they grow. She still does have sensory issues, but not anywhere to the level of that she did when she was like probably like 7 and under. So it can get better for them over time. Tabitha, do you want to go? I know you have.
Sure. Yeah, my two kids, I would say Nixon is very similar to Jesse in his sensory profile. He's a big runner back and forth. I think we've talked about this on the podcast before. He mouths a lot of items, always has, even as a little guy. Right now, he's kind of in a phase where he's chewing his shirts. That's a new thing, but before that, it was hands in the mouth. Before that, it was rocks or pebbles or, just like mouthing different items. He does not like chewies. The rubber stuff doesn't do it for him. He also is avoidant. He's particular about textures on his skin. He's particular about liquid temperature, like he won't drink hot drinks, but he loves everything that's cold and frozen. He has had some issues with clothing. For example, he has a pair of Adidas pants that have Adidas stitched into the side of his pants. And we had a whole thing when I dropped him off at school because he was telling me he didn't like the letters on his pants. So he's definitely motion driven. When he was younger, he was a lot more in motion constantly, never stopped, always moving his body and jumping and walking back and forth and running. Our daughter Nora is a mixture too. She has way higher sensitivity sensory wise than Nixon ever did. She's hypersensitive to sound, has a real problem in noisy places, unfamiliar places with lots of people. She gets overstimulated quickly in those environments, and she will wear headphones sometimes. It's a kind of a newer thing where she's like, I think she's understanding the use of them, but mostly she just covers her ears with her hands to damper the sound. And then she's a huge seeker. She loves textures. She
She
loves
does that because she's thrilled too, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Tabs? Cover
Yep.
her ears. Yeah.
She covers her ears when she's excited, when she's overwhelmed, when she's unsure. It doesn't even like just walking
Which is
into
nice because it's an
unfamiliar-
indicator that she's having a feeling.
Yeah, and you can usually tell by
I'm just
how
kidding. Like,
Yeah.
I'm kidding because you're always solving a puzzle.
yeah. But I mean, really, you can even tell by the way that she does it to her ears what she's feeling at the time, like whether she's excited, whether she's scared or overwhelmed. She is movement, bouncing, jumping, crawling, swimming. Anything she can do with her body, she is all about it. Swinging. If she's sitting down, it's like very rare. Usually it's if she's sick, if she's completely spent, but most of the time she's in motion. She also had issues with eating things in the past, what they call pica, like gravel and dirt and stuff like that, which I think is also sensory driven for her, particularly like she likes the sound and texture of those things in her mouth. She also loves sand and foam and anything that has an abnormal texture to it. She loves. She is clothing avoidant, as in would prefer to never wear clothes for the rest of her life. Yeah, ever. She's not to the point where she won't go outside with clothes on. She understands the function of clothes. If we're putting on clothes, we're going outside, we're going in the car. When she's at home, she's pretty much no thank you. Immediately comes off. She could undress herself so early, so young, so quick. We literally had such a problem with keeping clothes on her when she was little. She's also very high gross motor and fine motor. And so I find her like she does a lot of sensory stuff with necklaces and beads and stuff on her skin, which I think is why she prefers to not have clothes on, because she'll like lay a necklace on her skin, which is sensory input. I always joke that my kids are like, you never know which way it's going to go when we go out into public, because they're polar opposites in their sensory needs and avoidant behavior. So usually if we go to a place, it's rare that it fits the mold for both of them and what they want to experience or
That's
what
tough.
they want to avoid, like, so that can be very challenging out in public for sure. And going to a unfamiliar place for both of them is very hard. If they've never been there before, it's like you have to take in the space the first go around and you don't know how it's going to go. And then usually on the second time, it's a lot better once they know
What to expect.
what to expect and what's there. And it's really just like stopping for all the things, even swim lessons. We had swim lessons that was in a hotel on a busy road. Would not recommend, and it was like set up for our kids. It's through a program for activities for children with special needs. But there was a fireplace, and then they were both enthralled with the fireplace, and there was like rocks on the fireplace, and there was the hallway with the carpeting, and the texture of the wallpaper on the walls, and like
You're like, is there a side door, people, somewhere here?
like, do we have to walk through the entire lobby to get to the pool? So and then they're like going opposite directions. Like Nixon's at the fireplace, Nora's touching the carpet, and again, that's disgusting. Carpet in a hotel. I'm like, please
Tabs
don't.
has like a windowless van style wagon that's
Like,
about to be patented.
yeah, it's just
Here,
like,
kids, get inside. Put your
Yeah.
blindfolds on.
but both of them, you can feel the vibrations of their sensory overload as it's happening. So a lot of times I'm gauging where they are with when Nixon starts running in public repeatedly or can't focus and can't answer a question, his language drops. Like I know, oh, we're on the verge of like he's overloaded. Nora amps it up if she's getting overstimulated, like literally cannot even, it's like Dash from The Incredibles. Like you can't you can't stop her or like confine her or like you just feel the energy changing and shifting when they're overstimulated and in a sensory way for sure. You can feel that coming. So I've learned that over time. And I think it's something we always knew with Nixon. We just didn't know what it was called. And we knew that we were like waiting for something to happen or like watching for him to be overstimulated. And now it's like, okay, we got language for it. You can feel it coming. And often we'll leave a place before we get to that point because I know the next step is going to be not good to get out of the place that we're in. And some people, I think, don't understand that sometimes because you're like, I gotta go. We gotta go right now. And it's going to take us 10 minutes to get the shoes on or to pack the bag or put the coat on or whatever it is. And those 10 minutes, that's all we got. And then sometimes you make it to the car and it's a bad situation, but at least you're like in the car at that point and out of the place, So it's challenging, I think.
It's funny because Alyssa, I never realized running was like a part of it. Like I don't know, because all kids run, right? So it's like not that strange, but she still does this now. It's only when she's like kind of like on the verge of like getting overwhelmed or overstimulated. And I think it's her way of trying to calm herself down. But you see her do it. I mean, she's a big girl. She's like 5'7", 5'8". She's over 200 pounds. So and I have a small house. So then she just comes like ballering through the kitchen and everyone's instinct is to tell her to stop, what are you doing? Because it also is intimidating when you have like this large person just like running in this like very small
space. Yeah.
But it's like, I notice that she does it. And it's like, I think it's like just her way of trying to like regulate herself.
Yeah. Both of my kids do that. Well, and I saw this video on Instagram of an adult autistic in a restaurant, and she was describing how the restaurant feels to her and the sense of sound going into her brain. She described it as pain. She's like, there's so much action and intensity and noise. It actually feels like I'm in pain from the amount of level of sound. And that kind of struck me for Nora specifically, because I'm like, why would you want to be in a place that was actually physically making you feel that terrible? Like I wouldn't want to be in a place that makes me feel that terrible.
And smells too a lot at restaurants. I've read about people saying like the different smells, like someone's walking by with food, that like
Yeah.
a lot of people are just so much more sensitive. And like our kids, like Alyssa and Nora, they really can't tell us what's
Yeah.
bothering them sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's like this whole guessing game. I wouldn't think of a smell. Like I wouldn't
Yeah.
have thought of that before but I
Nora
know certain
yeah.
smells bother me. So it's
Yeah.
like everything's
Nor-
so much more intensified for them.
Nora definitely has a smell sensitivity too, not just sound. Like she's
Yeah.
literally pushed away my dinner before
Yeah.
because she
Mhm.
doesn't like the way it smells or close to
No,
her
yeah.
face. Yeah.
It's, there's all these things in the eating too. A lot of our
Mm.
kids really struggle with eating, and that all has to do with the sensory system too, which a lot of people don't realize that that's also a part of it. Jen, do you want to talk about Kaya?
Yeah, well, I jumped up when Tabitha said painful because Kaya's SLP Jackie. I've talked about her many times. She was one of the first therapists that was very invested in her and also invested in me. And she explained things to me that I just had no idea. One was the sound, and she said it is physically painful for her. It hurts her. And she said everything, smells of things, because like Nora, and even to this day, sometimes she won't tolerate food at the table.
Yeah.
So she won't come to the table, or even if I'm sitting on the couch and she's on the other couch, she'll tell me to put it away if she doesn't like the smell of it. So Facebook memories come up and I'll chuckle because there'll be pictures of her covering her ears at like 1 and 2 and 3. And I was like, oh, she doesn't like hearing mama sing. No, Jen, that's not what, I mean, I'm sure that is definitely what it is, but not,
You sing so beautifully.
not actually what it was. And so we went through many years where she would wear headphones. Now she really doesn't have much of an interest in wearing them. So I always have them in my purse. I give her the option. But like you, I have to sort of, or I think it was Jamie that said, you have to be so prepared for where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
Like she just asked to go to this restaurant. It is extremely loud and she struggles in that restaurant. Right now, we're not going to head that way. It's knowing sort of what her limits are in those places now. But for her, it's so funny because I had to think about it because this is just our everyday stuff. But things like clothing, she will not wear jeans. She will only wear leggings. She's very particular of how they go on. If there's any sort of struggle to get the clothing on, whether it's top or bottom, that clothing will never go back on her again. So I have to be very careful how I present her clothing to her because she simply will not put it on. She's very, very particular about how socks feel on her feet. So
Alyssa
again,
too.
when I put them on,
My kids too.
yes, socks are really, she's really particular about those. Yeah. And then again, I didn't know what OT was. Jackie was her SLP. And it got to the point where literally she would be holding Kaya by her feet, dangling her upside down as she's doing her speech therapy because Kaya needed that input. And she really likes the pound, like the feeling of like hitting the ground, that feeling she gets from that. So Jackie put us onto OT and that sort of, and then OT put us onto feeding because she had severe food aversions, which I've talked about many times. When I look back on all that stuff, it's like, oh, kid, so hard, There's so many different things in her day to day, but for her, she is definitely a sensory seeker. When she's anxious, she'll ask for her heavy gray blanket, which is her weighted blanket. So I do like now that she can recognize that she needs that input from it. And we have a swing in our ceiling like most people do. And she spends a lot of time on that. And I know when she really kind of gets going, really, and Jackie said, it's just her body needs that input. So we just let her have at it.
Well, don't you feel like too that it's like you have to balance the decisions of how many things you're going to do in one day? Like some people will be like, hey, we have a birthday party at 3. I'm like, well, we already have something in the morning. So sorry, we can't do the 2 things.
Well, I will think about that.
back.
I'm like, okay, if we have to go to the grocery store and then we have a lunch date with somebody and then something else to do. I'm like, one of those can't happen.
Yeah.
She can't go into a busy grocery store. She's very, very sound sensitive. So I always laugh because, again, I'm sure it might be my singing, but, she can be right in front of me and she's a teenager now, just so everyone listening understands where the attitude's coming from. However, I can be in the bathroom and I will be humming in the shower and she can hear me down a hallway, around a corner in another room. I mean, her sound sensitivity is so intensified most of the time. Rarely since she was little Can she tolerate a radio on in the car, or radio, like music on in the car? She's very sensitive to speakerphone. It really bothers her if anyone's on, mother, if you're listening, speakerphone, it drives her crazy. So when I'm driving, I can't usually answer a phone call that's coming in because it just agitates her so much. So things like that. But I know you just get used to it every day with her. But do you know what I mean about the input of the impact on something?
Yeah.
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 And she goes through stages of sort of what she needs, but I find that the weighted blanket for her is kind of a constant.
Oh yeah. Both my kids use weighted blankets to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because like a lot of these things, it wasn't common back in our day to have a swing from your ceiling. So like Alyssa
Yeah.
never got to experience that. And all these things that are out, the fidgets, the necklaces that they can mount, like these, you couldn't just pop on Amazon and like order something. So we kind of had to just like figure out, I guess, things like in a different way. But like we did figure them out. For example, we got this comforter. I call it the lead blanket because like literally it's so heavy that like if you can't even kick it off. So I hate it because I like to kick my blankets off if I'm hot. So Alyssa somehow inherited this blanket. I swear to God, it is the original weighted blanket. It's not technically a weighted blanket, but it basically is. And that's her blanket. And she loves that blanket. So it's just like, then this is years before I ever even heard of a weighted blanket. The water thing with Alyssa was huge. Where like water, and she still really loves water. She would be in the tub. I mean, she would spend hours and hours in the tub. Sometimes
My
it would be
kids too.
sitting, we would just let her like have the drain down and just let her sit there and let like the faucet water run on her. But you had to be really careful with her because she didn't feel heat.
Oh,
So
yeah.
she would, I mean, she could have scalding water go on her and she wouldn't even flinch. And even to this day, she can take the hottest shower and she loves it. It doesn't bother her. Now, as a 20-something-year-old, like she knows what she can tolerate, but obviously a 4-year-old is a lot different. We had an instant where one day she put her hand on, we have an electric stove, so we have the ceramic top stove. So even the stove was off, but it's still hot. She put her hand on the burner. I didn't notice. I turned around and her fingers were just on the burner. Like, and I had didn't cry, nothing. I had to lift her hand. We end up calling 911 just for like them to like, she had 2nd-degree burns. I mean, they all bubbled up and they came and like helped us, but she didn't even feel it. Eventually she would feel it. Sometimes it would be an hour later. Sometimes it could be a half an hour later. Her body could just not feel the heat. And the same thing with pain. She used to bang her head and they would say, oh, you just ignore her. And it's like, no, she'll keep doing it. She doesn't feel it. When she could just do it over and over. Same thing. She used to drop to her knees. And when I say drop to her knees, like she would go up in the air, like a few feet up in the air and just land on her knees. And she would repeatedly do it. Like we had to stop her because she didn't feel it. Now she walks by and hits her arm on the chair and she's like, ow, ow. So it somehow flipped. Like, so it did like of now she knows if something, if she bangs her head once, that's it. She won't bang her head again because then she's all upset that her head hurts because, now she feels it. But back then it just did not, her system was so underdeveloped that she didn't feel pain. She didn't feel heat. I mean, you have to be so careful. You literally cannot take your eyes off her for a second when she was younger because she could burn herself or hurt herself and there's nothing to stop her because she's not feeling that pain. That's like a pretty scary thing. Obviously that's a little bit extreme, but these are the things that, and with her eating, she almost stopped eating. Again, like feeding things weren't really like a big concern. They didn't have feeding clinics, not for like this type of stuff. So we just like kept trying and trying and trying. And eventually like she just ate a little more and a little more, but she was down to eating only Nutri-Grain bars and cheese doodles. But we didn't know anything about feeding stuff. Like there was so much other stuff going on that it was almost like we were concerned, obviously, wanted her to eat, but like there was so much other stuff happening that like nobody was like caring about that. Like they're like, well, she's eating Nutri-Grain bars. At least there's like some Nutri-Grain bars and cheese doodles. Literally all she ate at one time. And all this stuff was due to her sensory system. And I really think that that's what really makes a difference today is she doesn't have those battles. Yes, she can get overwhelmed and she does have the clothing thing, but I also think it's a 2 factor. It's like Okay, part of that's the autism. She likes things to be the same. She likes things to be a routine. She doesn't like things change. But then there is also the part of it is like it has to, like, she would never wear jeans. She wouldn't wear a dress. She can't wear sweaters. I mean, she won't even wear long sleeves. Tags are okay, but if it's like a stiff tag, that, I mean, she'll just rip it right out herself now. Before we had I mean, I had to cut the tags off everything. Nothing could have a tag. Now, if it bothers her, she takes it off herself. I mean, she'll go and get scissors and cut it right off if it bothers her, but not every tag bothers her. But like socks can't be tight. It's hard for her to put on new shoes because, when they're not broken in, she doesn't like the feel of that. So we do still have issues. It's not like they're not gone. They're just not as extreme. And I think her body just developed more. Obviously, you live in a house with 4 children. I mean, you're gonna get used to noise. It's just gonna happen. And I think that just has helped her. So she can go to a noisy place like Disney on Ice, a restaurant. This is a funny story. Do not judge me because I know this is terrible. We go into a restaurant the other day. They try to sit us on the bar. I go, oh, she can't. The noises just bother her. And Lexi's like, Mom, they bother you. I'm like, well, they bother me, but they don't know that. So it's just funny.
Gonna say, like you said, it changes, and she doesn't do the impact anymore. Like, it's not like she grew out of it. I'm sure she could have that sensory need again, but she hasn't done that for years. That was just sort of the lead into it that gave clues.
It's funny because I have so many pictures of Alyssa with her hand over her forehead, and I never thought twice about that. And then I realized that that was her trying to block input from coming in because these were taken on Christmas Eve, and on video you just hear her crying in the background the whole time. Now at the time I just thought she was being cranky, maybe another ear infection was coming. I don't know. She was 1.5, right? But it's like everything that was happening to her, the dress, her hair was in a pony, the people in the house, like all these things happening. I mean, this poor kid was so overstimulated, and like we were clueless. We didn't know. Like this was before we knew anything about censoring anything. But now looking at pictures, I'm like, oh my God, like, oh, it's so interesting that she's crying in the background the whole time. Like, oh yeah, you live and learn.
Let's just say this explains her first birthday a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel that's so hard when I look back at like Celie in jeans sitting on Santa's lap, losing her cool. I'm like, oh man, it's just like the reckoning, Celie, as you've said, Kim, I feel like, or I would agree that many of our kids cross over into rather extremes on both sides of this. And my daughter is no different. She basically is a mega sensory seeker until it shifts, and then it's sensitive city, and it's a different profile. Like, I don't know, to start at the beginning, it's her mouth. Like, she just broke the nookie, by the way, April 2023. She is done.
Yay.
Yep. But it took until 8 and a lot of prayer and some bribes and Chris Lindsay. That's maybe the wrong order. Let's do that backwards. Chris Lindsay first. Anyways, she has walked this line of pica, and then suddenly we make a turn or figure out a solution and it sort of stops. But she's the kid that would chew gum that she finds out in public, ABC gums. So we've got lots of mouth stuff. She's always got that like chap from her lower lip, like chin to nose situation, that red raw chap.
Nixon does that too.
She's a snot sucker, like pro. I even think that she plays on her own tears so that it over creates mucus so that she can suck to soothe. It is nasty. She's a very cool kid. If this is your first episode, you should listen further, but it is disgusting, that stitch.
Boogers are like the one thing that I just like, I can't.
I can't, because it happens. I just want you to know it happens, and it is the most disgusting
literally
thing.
Terrible. It gives me just the like, oh.
And I believe she cries purposely to a certain level to create, to feel the salty tears, to lick them, to have the, oh, for God's sakes. Anyway, so we've got the mouth stuff. I now can see that when it's kicking up, because we have the nookie break. So like if she's starting to fiddle with her mouth more, I'm like, oh, indicator. She is all about the textures. Like her bed looks like some Parisian princess wonderment. It's like velvety and silky and weighted and snuggly and furry and all. That all brings calm, but it really only works when she's near collapse in her like fight and flight. So textures only soothe when she's ready for that to work. In regards to her sight, I feel like she has this checkout that she does. Like the visual world is so much for her. And I don't know that she looks at it to see stuff. It's like she looks at it to catalog things, whether it's for information or for recall for later. I mean, I really can't say, but when it's too much, she will, like, we've always had this thing called brain break where she'll put her mask on or she'll pull her hood over her face or go in the best stroller that we had of our whole life called the City Mini Baby Jogger or something. It was heaven. James knows. It's amazing. The stroller has a pair like that top that goes down to the navel on the kid. So you're basically in like an IKEA egg chair. Now we use the sensory use sweatshirt with the mask inside. And I don't know. Sound is interesting for Celie because it has to be loud by her choice. So if you enter a room that's like too much, it's just too much. Things are easily too much, yet she's the loudest. I know this of all of our kids, like the most sensitive, loudest people on the earth are this category of people.
And it's like the word no really, really hurts areas really bad for some reason.
Daggers. So we too walk this line of sound. I will tell you, like with her bipolar, we can see her swinging because she will use sound to rise as she does. So as she goes into mania and she's like really, really vibrating high and really revved up, she will want an iPad on, Alexa playing, our TV louder. It's just like everything is complex and big, loud, layered.
But don't you dare breathe too loud.
Don't you dare. Or move her
She'll hear it.
toe, or nudge a blankie, or look at her. Yeah. Outside of that, it's like such extreme stuff. No hot, no cold. I mean, you guys have all seen her in a leotard in a blizzard without the shoes on, thinking that she's just the best. Like she's going to go melt it. She has no concept of herself in space or space around her. So she's the weeble wobble kid and she's bruised, like just black and blue Celie Planning, because she just has no space awareness. But we use tons of tools. We use salty and sour stuff. Like if we're out in Target and things become too much, having a Sour Patch Kids in my bag will allow her to like get some input, get control, feel balanced in it, and then we carry on. But she does makeup for sensory play, and we have all the one thing that I don't know if I've heard about this here on the podcast from one of our people, or if I've just made this up in a Rachelism, but we stopped calling it toys, all of the sensory stuff, and started calling it tools. So make sure you grab your sensory tools or grab your tools in your bag or make sure you've got tools for what you'll need today. And it takes it away from her needing to share it as much. It makes it a coping skill and something that she understands has a value, not just a trinket, you know? I don't know. I pray to avoid water. We're in that like hypervigilance. She's amped up Celie life. It's so sensory derived.
It is, and it's really more encompassing than you realize. And as you go through this, you make all these connections, and you're like, oh, Alyssa used to have what we would call like basically a good phase and a bad phase. And once she had like one bad day, you were in a bad phase. Like it's just the way it went. And sometimes it would be like a week of good days, and then it would be 2 months of bad days, you know, and it kind of just went like that. And then I never really made the connection, but looking back, it was like, I really think that her good phases really were based in the better weather because she got more running. She was out in the yard. She was on the swing set. And then if it was summer, she was getting the water. We have a pond very close by, like a 2-minute drive.
Safe
She would
distance.
be able to go to the pond. We, you know, go to the, we do have a pool. Some years it's open, some years it's not, but we always had like the little kid pools. And when she was getting all this stuff, it was really just, water has such a calming effect on her, even now. We go to Florida, you've never seen this kid happier. She is so content. She's sleeping. The difference is incredible, but she's
Yeah.
getting all that, we're going to amusement parks. The rides give her that, the water. It really, really has a calming effect on her even now. But then it almost made her just able to function better, where she kind of wasn't functioning and she wasn't able to regulate at all. And then all of a sudden she would have these times where she'd be able to do it. It didn't make the connection at first that it was like, oh, well, this, in the winter, she's not getting any of that. She's not
Right.
getting water. She's not getting out in the yard. I mean, we're literally used to be we would literally be a human trampoline, like where we'd like bounce her to like your arms felt like they were gonna fall off. It was just,
Yeah.
and she really, really needed that. So I think it's like you just find those things, and obviously we'd have a pan of water on the table and let her sit on the table and splash that, like when it wasn't a time that we could get out to it. But
We do
it
that a
really
lot too.
makes such a difference.
Yeah,
Um,
water's huge for us too as a regulator.
And
really-
also the most dangerous feature of the entire earth.
Yes. Also terrifying. Yes.
Also.
Yes.
Well, and I
Yeah.
used to have issues like when she got a little bit older, I couldn't get her to leave the pond. I mean,
Yeah.
when she was 4, you scooped her up and you put her in the car kicking and screaming. It's fine. Try to do that to a 10-year-old. It's not, I mean, I had times where I'm saying literally dragging her by her body, like pulling her up the sand. And she was like, I had to have Neil meet me a few times after work because I couldn't get her out. I couldn't
Yeah.
get her into the car. And then it's like, at that point, it felt like, is this even worth it? I mean, when it's a 4-year-old, yeah, people stare, people look, but it's like, it's a 4-year-old. When you're like physically grabbing somebody's arm and like pulling them,
Right.
because it's like,
Yeah.
and I got 2 little kids with me too that are like, I have to obviously watch them and make sure they don't drown on top of it. It was so bad. I remember just being in tears and being like, I can't bring her. I can't do it. I can't get her to go home. Like, it's like I'm a prisoner. I mean, it's dramatic because I'm at a pond and it's sunshine and beautiful and I'm by water.
I don't know if
so
you
it's
heard
not
about it, but
really
we're-
like a prisoner, but
this is a 5 Autism Mom podcast, and all of our listeners usually have this common link. So we know the prison.
it's almost like, is it even worth it to
Yeah.
do this?
Yeah.
Because the leaving is so bad. And she would just be so upset because she didn't want to leave. And she just didn't, she understood she didn't want to leave. She knew, like, they're so
The
smart. Like,
COVID-19 reintegrated or brought that problem to the forefront, I would bet, for so many of us, because when things halted, and even like when you have a positive test or an exposure and you needed to be off for 2 weeks, like just the whole routine being off in such a huge way set all of this sensory,
oh yeah.
like,
Well, I try and explain to people
Oh, it's such a
sometimes
mess.
too, like about the energy output. Like, in order to go somewhere, I have to be hyper vigilant,
Yeah.
period. No matter where we're going, period. It does not matter if we're at your house, if we're at the mall, if we're at trampoline park, whatever the case may be. I have to make sure that all the safety things, and I'm navigating that ahead of a time. So you have to gauge what's coming. It's so hard to explain the level of energy that you have to output to go somewhere. And if you've had even a couple hard hours in the morning, to get somewhere in the afternoon with, for me, 2 kiddos that could be dysregulated, or, one thing could tip the scale, and then I'm like trying to get them both out of one place by myself. I've tried to explain this so many times to people, and there's just no words to explain how challenging that is some days, to make it even from the house to the car, to then drive to the place before you even start the adventure of
it's
where
like-
you're going.
People feel like you're being so over dramatic. I feel like
Yes.
sometimes.
Yes.
I remember people saying like, well, let's go to the beach. And I'm like, no, the ocean with 2 kids, one that will just like run and not stop, one that will just like run into the water and keep going. Like, I
I
can't
love
go
it.
to
And the people are
ocean.
like, oh, we'll help.
We'll help.
We'll
Yeah,
all be
we'll
there. F off.
Or it's like, okay, oh, let's go
No.
to this beach, and it's somewhere I've never been, and it's like, okay, well, is
No.
there rocks? Is there like cliffs? Where's the parking lot? How far is
Yes.
the parking lot from where you are on the beach? Like, there's all these questions.
What
and all
color
these,
is the sand?
well,
What
there's
temperature
all
is the
these,
water?
all these things that like I have to know to be able to know if I can
Yep.
navigate that, even
Yep.
though you're gonna help me. Because what always happened to me is like that help with my son, which I do appreciate that, and I'm glad that he's not stuck in misery because like me and his sister are. But like, oh, you're off with my typical son while I'm like chasing, wrestling, like
Sweating.
I mean, this is not my idea of a good time.
Emphasis on sweating.
Oh, emphasis
Yeah.
on sweating.
No, like this
Why
is
isn't how much
terrible.
the parent sweats on the ADOS for our kids?
Yeah.
That should be one of the questions.
Yes, it should.
It should also be
How
on the
many
questionnaire.
tools do you
The-
have in your purse?
Yeah, the 500 questionnaire. Let's remove the question that says, "Is your child odd?" And let's replace it with, "How often do you sweat on a regular basis? How
Could
many
you bring
toys,
out a bra
sensory
by the time
toys
you hit the beach parking lot?
do you
And
have in your
and
purse?"
it's also one of those things that I find it's like, so maybe one time you go and everything's fine. So now
Yep.
people are like, oh, she was fine.
Oh.
It's like, yes, she's fine until she's
Today.
not. She's fine until you take something away from her. She's fine until you tell her no. She's
Then
fine until
hold my
she can't like
coffee.
steal people's snacks and floaties. You know what I mean? She's fine and you know, all these other things not happening that could happen in any minute. And then she's not fine.
And it's really too like we're also gauging how uncomfortable and terrible that is for our kid. Like I don't want my kids to feel uncomfortable and crappy in a situation for 3 hours just because I want to go and attend something. That's not fair to them. If they feel like garbage the whole time and then we also have an entire day the next day of recentering and regulating themselves because I forced them to go someplace that was not set up for them to be at in the first place. That's not really fair to them just
Yeah.
because you want me to attend something. And it really is about they're not trying to be challenging in that way
Right,
or
right.
you know, they're uncomfortable in the circumstances and they cannot regulate themselves in certain situations. And sorry,
It
we
really
gotta say
touches
no.
on the fact that we as the parents have to be the bridge between somebody else's expectation and our kids' ability, disability, and the like accommodations that we have to make because
Yeah.
people just don't get it. And like you guys said, like, oh, Celi's been to the cabin before, or Celi's whatever. Well, I last time I had to pick a fish hook out of her butt. And then like because she gets into everything and a trillion other things happen. Like, I'm sure that was great for you to watch, but I've been sweating in my bra since 6 a.m. My kid didn't sleep last night. It's not fun. I'm glad you think that the 4th of July only happens because we're all here. F right off. Like, we
It-
can't. When we can't, we can't. And
Yeah.
if you can't see that, then again, like,
Well, and I do agree as Nixon has gotten older, like I can take him out by himself way easier than when he was 3 and 4. Holy cow. Like it's night and day. And it's
Yeah.
still like we still have our challenges and we still have like, you know, safety issues, especially in parking lots and stuff like that. But compared to him being 3 or 4, it's like incredible. And hopefully Nora will get to that point where it'll be like easier. But the two of them combined at their ages right now is like fireworks.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was so challenging when I had Alyssa and Neil didn't necessarily have those challenges. So it's
Yeah.
like, but he was still a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old kid
Yeah.
who, like, you know, you still had to be. I mean, if you're in water, you have to watch them and make, or at a playground, you still having to be
Yes.
kind of like
Monitoring.
somewhat, you know, he obviously would listen and follow directions and stuff like that, but it was still super challenging. Like,
Yeah.
then you just get this anxiety about doing things, you know,
Yeah.
so then it's,
oh,
you
I
get,
thought I was on mute for that sound.
yeah, it's, you get like trapped in your own head because then you're thinking about all these things that could go wrong.
Yes.
And
yes.
sometimes, you know, that works against you because you really do have to try and expose them to things.
Yes.
It's the only way that they will learn, and it's the only way you'll get used to things, but you have to do it in a way that, like, you have to be set up to be like, okay, this is what's going to happen. There's going to be 2 of us. If this goes wrong, one of us can leave, or like we'll all leave, or like whatever it might be. You have to have the expectation that this might not go well. And a lot of times they'll surprise you and you'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, well, this
Yeah, a
today
lot of
was
times it does go okay. Yeah. And I think that is one thing that I think I've learned from you, Kim, but just in general too, is like we are not going to be trapped in this like I'm going to keep trying. It's hard as hell sometimes, and sometimes on a Saturday I'm like, there's no way I can do anything today. I can't do anything today. Me personally, I'm overstimulated. I'm at my brink. There's no way that I can do it. They probably could, but I'm constantly trying to take them out to see how it goes, because it is like a lot of times it's okay. Even if I'm completely exhausted by the time we get home, they had a good time, me, medium time.
I hear, don't you hear Kim McIsaac in your head though? Tab's like,
Yeah.
book the ferry ticket.
Yeah, book the ferry ticket. Yes. Yes. Because it is overwhelming, and it is sometimes like just convincing yourself that it's going to be okay, and that if it doesn't work out, we'll leave. I mean, we did that. We went to the pumpkin patch with friends of ours, and we made it to the hayride. We made it to the picking of the pumpkins, and then there's all this other stuff going on. Nixon's like, I want to go home. I'm like, okay, that's all she wrote. We're out of here. We got the pumpkins. Nixon's over it. We're not
But I
waiting in the
find
line.
that's true, right? For all,
Yeah.
even us, like sometimes the idea of something is so much nicer than the actuality of doing it.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
like, you're like, my husband's always like, whose idea was this? And I'm like, it looks
Yeah.
good on Facebook.
Yeah,
I
this
don't
is
know.
terrible, actually.
Get the
Yeah,
picture
this
and then
is,
you go.
yeah,
Exactly.
there you go. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
So yeah, so this is our take on sensory people. We try to give lots of examples for you. We have so many in between the five of us. If you are concerned about your child having sensory issues, you definitely want to get a consultation with an occupational therapist. They are the people that are the most knowledgeable and can help you with tools and tricks and all the things that will be helpful to your kiddo. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
you.
Wait, does this air when we are just before our week together?
Yeah.
Then I just
Cool.
have to say one quickie thing. I think what's happening is that by the time this launches, we will almost be like within 4 days of being together. In addition, we will have celebrated our 2-year anniversary, which is in like a couple of minutes. And you guys, we want to thank you for being here with us. And I just, boop, happy April.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us at the table for this episode. Check out the description to find where you can sign up for our newsletter, how to become a supporter, and find links to us individually. Join us next Monday for more, and while you wait, check out our content on Facebook and Instagram. If you are enjoying the podcast, please make sure to subscribe and rate and review us wherever you listen. To contact us, you can email us at tablefor5podcast@gmail.com. We can't wait to sit with you again.